Okay guys, this video is going to be about Chinese, Japanese, Mexican immigration experience. It'll also be about xenophobia, and we'll talk a little bit about the blue eyes, brown eyes experiment. Make sure that you are doing your study guide. That should also be on Google Classroom. And make sure that you are going and making up your notes quiz. You can use your notes on the quiz. The one thing that you cannot use is your iPad. Okay, please put off your notes. Though if you're in quarantine, we can have a chat about that because I know you have your iPad at home, right? So if you're in quarantine, please email me. If you're in class, you know that when we take our quiz, our open notes quiz, you will have to print your notes off. Okay. Make sure you're filling out the study guide. The study guide is almost identical to the quiz. Okay, so make sure you're taking the opportunities that I'm giving you for success. Okay, if you have any questions, let me know. So just some distinctions. Ellis Island, where immigrants are going to, they're traveling to check in before they are admitted to the United States. Ellis Island is on the East Coast. They are primarily accepting European countries, right, because it's on that East Coast. And then we have Angel Island that's on the West Coast. They're seeing a lot of Asian countries come in through there because it is in San Francisco, California. So we see two different checkpoints for immigrants coming into the country on opposite sides of the country. We have them coming over on ships. In the lower classes, they were sitting in a place called steerage, and the wealthier classes would be in first class. If you need a way to remember this, Jack from, if you've seen Titanic, Jack is in the steerage cabin, or the steerage section downstairs, right, because he is of the lower class. And Rose, who is really rich, right, is in first class, in the upper class. So if you need a way to remember steerage and first class, you can think of Titanic. Also, there was totally room on that door at the end of Titanic. Just a hot take. I know a lot of people believe that. But also, we have to give Rose a break, right, because she was suffering from hypothermia. We won't go into that because this isn't about Titanic. But Chinese immigration experience, they came over originally for the gold rush. If you know anything about football in California, the football team is the 49ers. They are named after the 1849 gold rush. People who came over for the gold rush were called 49ers. That is why. The mascot of that team is like an old prospector with the little pickaxe in hand, right? Just a fun fact. But the Chinese immigrants come over for the gold rush, but they eventually stay to help build the Transcontinental Railroad, which was a railroad extending across the continent, across the country. And if you can imagine, that takes a lot of manpower to do. So there was a lot of dangerous work for them, right? Especially going across mountains and different terrain like that. So they stay to help build the railroads. Also, the Chinese Exclusion Act was basically passed to ban all Chinese immigrants' entry into the United States, except if you were a teacher, a merchant, a tourist, or a government official. So if you were none of those things, if you were just looking for work, which a majority of them were, you were not allowed into the country. And then in 1892, they extended by 10 years. Okay, so it's still a thing, 10 years. Then 10 years later, after that expires, they start restricting these people indefinitely. So this law is in place until further notice, okay? And that ends up being in 1943 when they finally repeal it. That is a long, long, long time for one group of people to be restricted entry into a country. And you can imagine the people that were allowed to be here, the suffering and the prejudice that they must have gotten from other people too after this was passed. So these are just some pictures of flyers that were put out, right? You see on this side, it's about a rally. Okay, they're telling people to meet at a certain street corner to voice their opinion on the Chinese problem, right? Whether or not Chinese people should be allowed into the country, right? We see over here that they're using language like hip hooray, they are celebrating that these Chinese immigrants are not going to be allowed into the country. So you see this like deeply rooted sense of nativism manifesting itself once again, right? This is just another one. It was at the bottom of the previous slide, but just encouraging people to get together and talk about why Chinese immigrants should not be allowed in the country. This is a political cartoon. This idea of building a wall to keep another group of people out is nothing new. We've heard that a lot lately, but it is not a new idea. We see that illustrated in this political cartoon. So the Japanese immigration experience, they originally also come over for the gold rush, but in 1884, Hawaiian planters are actually allowed to hire Japanese workers. And if you don't know much about the history of Hawaii, it actually used to be its own country before it became part of the United States. It's got a really, really sad history, but it's really interesting history. They actually had a king and queen at one point. I would encourage you to look it up. I wish we could go over it. I wish we had so many days to go over it because it is just so interesting. But in 1898, the United States annexes Hawaii, and they make it a part of their a part of the United States. So earlier, when they were going over to Hawaii, right, there was a huge immigration boom, and then when Hawaii becomes becomes part of the United States, there's also a even bigger immigration boom happening because these Japanese workers are able to move more freely back and forth from the mainland to Hawaii and back, right? So this is just another example of that toxic nativism, right? In this one, it's rules on how Japanese immigrants should live in certain areas. They're trying to control those groups, right? We see a newspaper article talking about the ban and how the president is passing this immigration ban on Japanese people. Mexican immigrants experience. They are trying to find work and escape the political turmoil that's happening in their country. The biggest thing for them is the National Reclamation Act, which creates new farmland for them and brings a lot of Mexican immigrants in to work the farmland. Between the years of 1910 to 1930, 700,000 people come to the United States from Mexico. So we see a lot of people coming up from Mexico to the United States to work that farmland. This is just another example of a political cartoon. We see this wall of money, right? Everything has a meaning in political cartoons. This idea of building a wall, right, out of money, because there was that whole debate on who's going to pay for that wall. This is just another example that this idea of building a wall to separate two groups of people is nothing original, right? Nothing new. So what is xenophobia? Xenophobia is actually the fear or prejudice against people from other countries. So the word xeno means foreignness or strangeness, and phobia we know is fear. So that is kind of where that comes from. Xenophobic people, when people are scared, there's like two reactions, fight or flight. And we see a lot of fight when it comes to xenophobia, just with violence toward these groups, right? And it manifests itself often in anger, right? So I put that picture on there because I think that's what a lot of xenophobic people see immigrants as, these scary people coming over, taking our jobs, right, bringing drugs into our country. These huge blanket statements that we're giving to groups of people that we don't know anything about. So there's kind of what xenophobia is. Okay, so just a little bit of background on this video. This is an experiment done by a woman by the name of Jane Elliott. And Jane Elliott actually conducts this experiment in a classroom of third graders in the 60s in Riceville, Iowa. And a little bit about Riceville, Iowa. It is all white, no people of color. And she is trying to show that these ideas of racism are taught, they are learned. It is not something everyone is born with, right? They are not born hating another group of people. And talking about the effects of these ideas on kids and their confidence and their performance in school. So I encourage you to pause it right now and watch this video. Okay, I'm just going to assume that you've watched the video. In this video, it's just really eye-opening just how quickly these kids turn on each other, right? And they actually do this with, they did this experiment with the Oprah Winfrey Show. That's a really, really cool video. I would look that up too, if you're interested. But it just kind of shows the, how quickly people turn on each other when they're put into groups of superiority and lesser than, right? And if we're going to dismantle racism in this country, we need to acknowledge it and acknowledge that it can be learned. And since it is learned, we can unlearn it, right? We can unteach it. So I just think that's a really good way to end this unit. And make sure you're filling out all the information that I have on Google Classroom. And I'll see you later.